Speaker, before I begin, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of my special order.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, you probably didn't know this, but 50 years ago, President Nixon signed the Endangered Species Act into law, which was designed to do 2 things, very important things: prevent species from going extinct and promoting their recovery. Mr. Speaker, since then, hundreds of plants and animals have joined the endangered or threatened species lists, spurring conservation and recovery efforts at all levels of government. And while well-intentioned, this law, unfortunately, has been abused and twisted so much that it doesn't even begin to achieve its goals. In short, it's a failure. Indeed, although there have been some successes, I've granted, of the 1,389 listed species in 50 years, and get this, only 72 have been recovered and removed from the list. That's a 5% success rate. Now, only in the federal government would anyone consider 5% a passing grade. The Congressional Western Caucus has long advocated for improvements to modernize the ESA and make it more effective for our species and more transparent for the American people. We have advocated on behalf of the rural communities that we represent, who are severely impacted by ESA listing decisions and who, in many cases, are working in collaboration with private landowners, community groups, tribes, local governments to promote successful species recovery and land conservation. And we have advocated to administration after administration to follow the science and fulfill the congressional intent of the law, which is to promote recovery of these species and remove them from the endangered species list. That's why I'm really proud, Mr. Speaker, to host this special order tonight, where you will hear from my Western Caucus colleagues about successful, locally led recovery efforts that are taking place across this country, about the need for conservation, not just preservation, of our species, the different impacts that ESA listing decisions have on local communities and economies, and some of the legislative reforms that are needed to finally bring the ESA into the 21st century. As we've seen over the past 50 years, the ESA has become a weapon used by extreme environmentalists, by serial litigators, to slow or halt critical economic development and land management projects in rural communities throughout the United States. From preventing the restoration of our forests, to creating overburdensome roadblocks to domestic energy development, the ESA, used in this way, actually can do more harm than good. These combative environmental groups use the ESA to drive a political wedge to achieve their true ambition: the end of ranching, the end of resource development, and the end of timber harvest on public lands. And it's not just a Western or a public lands issue, not at all. There are approximately 1.3 billion acres of private land in the United States, and 926 of the current listed species are on those private lands, which means cooperation with these communities and these landowners is essential. It's crucial for recovery. Unfortunately, ESA regulations often negatively affect the very people we need as conservation partners through land use restrictions, through reduced property values, and costly permitting requirements. In effect, the law literally makes enemies out of the people most critical to the species recovery. We must empower our local, our state, and our tribal partners to collaborate on comprehensive recovery and conservation efforts. And we understand, as the Western Caucus, more stringent regulations will not lead to more successful species recovery. In rural America, we value the responsible management of species, but we have to do so in a way that does not destroy our economies, that does not decimate our lands or leave our communities vulnerable to natural disasters. We need flexible tools, not tools that are one size fits all that come out of the federal government. To be successful in our shared goal of recovery, our nation's endangered species and threatened species. Tonight, as we always do, we are here to raise the voices of rural communities across this country. And tonight, we're focused on those voices that are telling us how they have been impacted by the ESA and make their message heard. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to begin this special order and turn to my first colleague in the Western Caucus, a gentleman from the great state of Indiana, Mr. James Baird. Well, Mr. Speaker, in summation, just wanted to say that as you've heard tonight, the Endangered Species Act, signed into law 50 years ago, was, and I think you probably picked this up, was designed to do two things. It was designed to prevent the species from going extinct and to promote its recovery. We need to return to the mission, to that mission. We need to work with landowners, local governments, with tribes, and always keep the well-being of the species in mind in that work. We also need to be transparent for the American people. There's just too much at stake for us not to be. And as members of the Congressional Western Caucus, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to elevate the voice of the people in rural America on important issues like the Endangered Species Act and so many others. So with that, Mr. Speaker, we conclude our special order, and thank you very much for allowing us to utilize this time. And I yield back.
The gentleman